9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Marc Polymeropoulos, and this is DSR's Above Average Intelligence Show. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome as my guest a fellow Red Sox fan, I might add, and we'll talk about that in a second, Mr. Matthew Levitt. Matthew serves as the Fromer Wexler Fellow and Director of the Jeanette and Eli Reinhardt Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligence at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and also is an adjunct professor in Georgetown University's Center for Security Studies. Matt has served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Also provided tactical and strategic analytical support for counterterrorism operations at the FBI. So a distinguished public servant, as well as now in a little bit of academia. Matt has lectured on international terrorism on behalf of the Department of State, Justice, Defense, and Homeland Security, consulted for various U.S. government agencies. I'm going on and on, Matt, on your bio. It's incredibly impressive. And I will say, from a personal standpoint, very selfishly, your book here, which I'm going to hold up, your book on Hizballah, sits by my desk because I use it as a reference guide all the time. So you kind of wrote the definitive.
Super. Now I got to get you the new version.
It is the new version. I ordered the new version as well.
All right.
But let's first start with probably the most important part. This is a critical day. You know, we had kind of the mother of our phone calls just now between Bibi and Biden. We don't know the results, but most importantly, I don't know if you saw there was a teaser for the Netflix special coming out on the Red Sox 04, and I went crazy when I saw it. I
haven't watched it yet.
As well. What'd you think?
I haven't seen the trailer yet. I've been meetings all my. I saw it was there. I don't want to do that for 90 seconds between meetings. I need some dedicated focused time. But I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that.
It's going to be that's going to be something which is going to be fantastic. Of course, Mike Barnacle, who's a friend of mine, legendary Boston Globe, of course, reporter now in Morning Joe. He's been telling me about this. I think one of his sons he was working on it. But that team was so special. So as we sit here and kind of languish in non-playoff hell, at least maybe on I think it's October 23rd. We will have something to look forward to. So
anyway, that's great. I was there. I was in St. Louis.
Amen. I was in Kuwait. In Kuwait City, screaming at the top of my lungs in the middle of the night, waking up the entire neighborhood, crying, I think.
Beautiful.
Anyhow. All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming on. An incredible several weeks dealing with issue, of course, that you have been an absolute expert on, both in the government and outside the government. So I guess, when I think of you sometimes, I always wonder, are you saying to yourself, this is my Super Bowl right now? I mean this. You're an expert on Hezbollah. For a long time, Hezbollah was not kind of on prime time, though a lot of us who worked against Hezbollah for years and years certainly understood the threat that they posed and how many Americans, sadly, that they killed. But this is kind of your Super Bowl, isn't it?
Look, it's been a run. I got to say, I do plenty of work on Al Qaeda and ISIS and terror finance and countering violent extremism. My wife teases me that the reason I enjoy and succeed at my current job is that it addresses my adult ADHD, doing lots of different things at the same time. But much of my career has been focused on Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, and that's the past 12 months have been that on steroids, and the past few weeks have just been, it's been hard to keep up. And between the Israeli onslaught on Hezbollah, I mean, literally the Hezbollah we've known for years no longer exists. I don't think it's ever going to exist again. Theoretically, they could recruit new people. They could promote people from within. That's going to take time. That's how many people have been taken out of commission and how many people at the first, second, third, and fourth tier are gone, leading to rumors of all kinds of other people, including financiers, trying to flee Lebanon, not just because there's war, anybody who can flee is fleeing, but because they're afraid that they're going to get targeted next. The Israelis are taking out all levels of people in positions of power that make this the engine that make this organization work. And the finances is one piece of that. Um, It'll take time for them to restock. They accumulated all kinds of weaponry, and not only mid and long range rockets, including precision guided munitions. And you see some of the explosions that are going off, and the amount of kind of cloud that comes out, and the secondary and tertiary explosions. You really get a sense that the Israelis are taking out some caches of big things underground, but also all the pre-positioned things that Hezbollah had along the border. It'll take time to restock all that. And I think one of the big opportunities we have next, and you'll appreciate more than most that I recognize this is going to be a huge demand on the intelligence community. Much easier said than done, but still, now's the opportunity to really put things in place to make it much more difficult for Iran to be able to rearm and refund its proxies. That includes Hamas, that includes Hezbollah. It also includes things like the Houthis, who without Iranian arms and some money, but really the arms and the training and how to use the arms, they're a small thorn in the Saudi backside, and they're not threatening international commerce and shipping.
So, as we kind of talk about these groups, there's also, as again, I'm looking at your book, and the new edition is out. But many of these Hamas and Hezbollah figures who we've known for many years, as you noted, are no longer with us.
Yeah.
Which is no one's shedding any tears, but I mean it has been years, decades of some of the same figures, and I'll just me because we chatted at the Sufan Group conference. I love telling stories, and I remember being in Amman in the late '90s playing literally street hockey with the Canadian embassy, and the Canadian Intel chief comes up to me and said, "I just got a weird call from downtown in Amman. A whole bunch of Canadians with Canadian passports I think they just tried to kill someone down there with some strange substance." I saw him later that night, and he's shaking his head. And of course, and he was laughing. He said, "Well, they really weren't Canadians; they're Israelis." And that was the Mossad hit on Khalid Mishal, who now is what? Of course, a very senior figure. So that was in the late '90s, and here we are in 2024. But I throw that out there because I think you're right that so many of our assumptions about the strength of these groups has been shattered. Now you can debate all day about the Israelis use of force in Gaza, but there's no doubt that Hamas has been severely degraded, and Hezbollah is even more extraordinary story, in which I think, and I just want to get your thoughts on this, particularly as you're an expert on this group. Hezbollah has been so battered, both from kind of intelligence penetrations, obviously decapitation strikes, foot soldiers taken out. But do you have to kind of sit back and say, okay, how do we assess this group now? Because I mean, everything since in the last 2 weeks has changed based on, I think, maybe things you studied for a decade plus. That's that as a researcher, as an academic, as an expert, that's actually not easy to do.
No. And I feel much worse for the people actually doing this in government, the intelligence analysts who are going to need to map out the next generation of Hezbollah. That's going to be a big lift. Look, I don't need to tell you that people in the U.S. intelligence community have been doing a jig at the news of the demise of people like Fouad Shukr and Ibrahim Akil, who were involved directly in the Beirut bombings in the 1980s, including the bombing of our embassy and the U.S. Marine barracks and the embassy annex, and taking out the CIA station and Ames and Buckley and all of it. But there's something bigger in the moment right now, beyond the fact that so many of these really important operational people have been taken out. So much so, by the way, that I don't refer to this as decapitation anymore.
Right.
This is open heart surgery.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Decapitation, you take off the head. So that's Nasrallah. Okay, maybe it's Nasrallah and a couple of other guys. Right? This is open heart surgery. Second tier, third tier, fourth tier. The guys running the backup intel center, the backup headquarters, the cache, the stores of caches of weapons. It's complete open heart surgery. But there's a bigger strategic issue that is very, very, very timely and current right now, as the Israelis appear to be preparing to strike back at Iran for firing 180-something ballistic missiles at Israel several days ago. The second such attack, the first one, of course, was the strike in April with drones, low-altitude cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. This more recent one, just ballistic missiles, so you didn't have any of that forward warning. advanced warning. As the Israelis are thinking about this, and they will do something, I think, quite clearly, Iran is in a little bit of a pickle on two counts, three really. The first is that I think both April and a week ago actually demonstrated the limitations of Iranian capabilities. They can shoot hundreds of stuff at you, but at the end of the day, they didn't hit any significant targets. They didn't kill any Israelis just now. One Palestinian, a Gazan in the West Bank, was killed when a piece of a rocket fell on him tragically. That's the one thing. Each time they do this, they're not actually making the world petrified of their incredibly advanced capabilities. So far, anyway, largely because of Israeli-U.S. CENTCOM cooperation, plus input from the Brits and the French and the Jordanians and reportedly one or two other Arab states who like to remain anonymous so as not to put themselves in the crosshairs of Iran. They haven't demonstrated incredible capabilities. But at the same time, they have created what I think is the best commercial for the fact that Iran presents a real threat to the region. Right. More rockets landed in Iraq in April than in Israel. And not only for the fact that Iran is this threat in the region, but also for the utility of a regional air defense system that includes Israel and U.S. CENTCOM. The second problem they have is that a significant part of their calculus for self-defense against Israel and a deterrence, really, much more than self-defense against Israel, because Israel is not trying to destroy Iran the way Iran is trying to destroy Israel, but their deterrence against Israel. And the reason they thought they could do all these things against Israel without Israeli retaliation over the past 18 years since the 2006 war, the last war with Hezbollah, is that Hezbollah built up all these rockets. And they saw those rockets as the best deterrence against an Israeli strike against Iran, in particular Iran's nuclear program. And should Israel or anybody else attack Iran's nuclear program or any other part of Iran, they saw these also as the best second strike capability. And a significant proportion of those rockets are gone. We don't know exactly how much. But New York Times quoted U.S. and Israeli intelligence as saying somewhere just north of 50% of those rockets have been destroyed. Let's say that's true, and I am in no position to say yay or nay. That still leaves them with, 60 to 100,000 rockets. Now, probably the Israelis have taken out more in the past few days, more of these crazy explosions. But the Iranians don't have that deterrent tool that they once did. And finally, and maybe most important, for the Iranians, the only real red line is that they don't want whatever mischief they start and create, regional war, malign activity in the region, they don't want that spilling over, bleeding over into the borders of Iran, right? Because this is a domestic stability issue. They fear that if something happens in Iran, they don't look 10 feet tall. It's why, for example, when presumably the Israelis killed Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, in Tehran, there for the president's inauguration in an IRGC safe house, the Iranians didn't pretend it didn't happen. They couldn't. They just said, no, it wasn't the Israelis got someone to pre-position an explosive in our secure facility. It was a rocket or a drone. They fired something. Right? Because at least that's a little bit less embarrassing. And at the end of the day, why do they really care? Because they cared about how people domestically would look at this. They understand that a significant proportion of the Iranian population is not interested in this revolution. And they're tired of the revolutionary leadership funding the Hezbollahs and the Hamases instead of providing services for their constituents, because they don't see them as constituents. And those citizens are tired of that.
So let me ask you a question. I think you paint I think a very solid picture of a battered Hamas, a battered Hezbollah, and Iran that's lost its aircraft carrier. It's an analogy I like to use in Hezbollah. But I think one of the problems that we have, certainly in the United States and amongst the kind of the chattering classes, is that we seem to be allergic to actually taking this opportunity. I mean, there's so much, I think, post-traumatic stress from Iraq and Afghanistan that anytime you say, well, hold on a second, maybe that we can help try to reshape the region. Even with discussions of, okay, can Lebanon somehow improve its state? People blanch at this, and people say, oh my God, here we go again. But in some sense, I think we're missing, if we're smart about it, there are opportunities here. And I think the Israeli national security establishment certainly is thinking of this. Perhaps the United States as well, they have to be a little more quiet, because again, that visceral reaction to, oh my God, regime change again. But what are your thoughts on that? Or more importantly, what should both U.S. and Israeli policy do, seeing that this axis of resistance has been battered, and you have Lebanon, which is a thorn, of course, in Israel's side. Perhaps there is some room to do some good there. What do you think?
This is a big, important question, and I think there's three things I want to say about it. The first is, I see right now kind of a battle of the new normals. Iran tried to create a new normal, the ring of fire, the uniting the fronts. They ideally wanted there to be not just a Hamas incursion from Gaza, but Palestinian groups from the West Bank towards the narrow center of Israel, Hezbollah from the north, Iraqi groups from the Golan Heights. Like that hasn't transpired. And you see Israel pushing back and the United States supporting, but from a distance, really Israel pushing back and saying, no, the new normals, we're not going to tolerate this. And we're not going to allow organizations committed to our destruction to accumulate weapons and capabilities over years just because we want to have calm. After October 7th, there's a whole new worldview among Israelis across the political spectrum. I've heard it a million times from Israelis that they say, we're no longer willing to live with a gun to our head, not from the south from Hamas, not from the north from Hezbollah. We have more of an opportunity. Well, there's an opportunity in Lebanon. There's an opportunity in Gaza. Neither of them are going to be easy. In Gaza, the problem is that for all of the Israeli tactical success, leave aside for the moment the fact that it's been achieved through tremendous destruction. I don't know that things could have been done terribly differently. I do know that lots and lots of innocent Palestinians have been killed. I blame that mostly on Hamas. It's a tragedy, every single one of those deaths. Leave that aside for the moment. The opportunity to do something better in Gaza is being lost, primarily because the Israeli leadership right now doesn't want there to be a united Palestinian polity, doesn't want there to be something that is a Palestinian self-governance that could maybe lead towards some type of two-state solution. And I think we're seeing an opportunity lost. Right? We have the opportunity, I believe still, to create something better in Gaza than what was. Our think tank, the Washington Institute, can look at our website. We published a roadmap weeks after October 7th. And I still believe that's what should happen. And the Israeli political echelon is missing an opportunity there. And you're going to see, it's no secret, there's some disconnect there between some of the political echelon and the military security, and for that matter, within Israeli society. You don't have that Israeli discomfort that you have with what could come next politically in Lebanon and Gaza with Lebanon, because there is a Lebanese government. Now, one that has been ineffectual because really it's more of a bunch of sectarian mafia-style dons who want their patronage systems to be in place. But forever and a day, the Lebanese have said, look, we can't take on Hezbollah. The U.S. has to do it. France has to do it. UNIFIL has to do it. None of those things were going to happen. Short of it, they said, not incorrectly, Hezbollah is better armed than we are. They've got better weapons, and we can't do it. We're afraid of another civil war. Well, actually, now someone has come in and effectively done it for them. The question is, when the dust settles, will the Israelis have only, and this is tremendous, decimated the Hamas leadership, significantly degraded Hezbollah's ability to fire rockets at Israel, and basically destroyed, at least for a period of time, Hezbollah's ability to do a cross-border raid into Israel. In other words, made it so that Hezbollah presents nowhere near the threat to Israel that it does, and that's it? Or do they go further, and or do others like the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, does someone within Lebanon take the opportunity today to help not only knock Hezbollah down to size in terms of its rockets and cross-border raid capacity, but also in terms of its fighters on the ground. Not only rockets, but AK-47s. My concern is that the Lebanese armed forces, the internal security forces, the politicians are going to be wary that Hezbollah is not going to be destroyed, and they will not be completely destroyed, and they may not be. They'll be shrunk down to size in terms of the threat to Israel, but they'll still be able to pack a punch domestically within Lebanon, and they will fight for their position in Lebanon. And are they still, even cut down to size today, too strong with small arms for the Lebanese armed forces? I think there's an opportunity here. I am not optimistic. I am not even cautiously optimistic. And I just had a conversation with a very good Lebanese friend of mine yesterday, and they said, no, Matt, you're wrong. Lebanese understand that Hezbollah is knocked down to size. It's going to happen. I would love for that person to be right. I am not even cautiously optimistic because I feel that in Lebanon, there's no group that's willing to stand up and say, no, we're going to take this fight, because it will be a fight to reclaim their country, to reclaim sovereignty, to reclaim the monopoly on the use of force, and to change the trajectory of Lebanon. But I have also said, and I've said this to members of Congress recently, in the event that Lebanese partners demonstrate a real willingness to do the hard things and start reclaiming their country, we have to be there to help them.
Look, I agree with you, and I hope there's that thinking at the National Security Council and in other kind of areas of the U.S. government, because again, I don't think we have to just be allergic to trying to take an opportunity. I do worry that anytime you raise this, there's going to be kind of a group out there that starts screaming about Iraq and regime change and Libya and all the things where they think that the U.S. has gone astray in the past. So I'm a little concerned on that, and I want to switch just briefly to one topic, which is a little more controversial, which of course is in the news constantly, and that's that. Despite what I experienced in my career, and I think you did as well, which is it's an extraordinary intelligence relationship between the United States and Israel, but there is political dysfunction now. I mean, the Bibi Biden relationship certainly is problematic, and that was before the Bob Woodward book, which of course everyone was talking about. Some other parts of the book, and then immediately those of us who care about the Middle East look at some of the the quotations of what Biden is saying about Bibi and the Israelis more so even than I do. That's going to play back in Israel as well, and Bibi is probably seething at this. So bottom line is, we talked about this kind of the mother of all phone calls today. I mean, I think it was rather ridiculous that the two leaders had not spoken for some time in these really critical times. But I guess my question to you is that relationship repairable between Biden and Netanyahu? And do you think it's important, at least, that they are speaking? I mean, we're talking about a potential, major regional war, and the fact that the two leaders of our respective countries are not getting along doesn't seem to be a recipe for success. What are your thoughts?
Look, it makes me grateful for the fact that I focus mostly on policy, not on politics. But of course, this impacts policy. I just had this conversation both with some Israelis and with some Americans, and they all say, and I think it's true, that the U.S.-Israeli relationship remains very, very strong. The nature of our communications to one another remains, because the relationship is strong, blunt. We should not agree with everything the Israelis say or do, and we shouldn't expect that they will do the same. I disagree with those who say that we haven't used, or the United States hasn't used, our leverage with Israel. I think that withholding arms at a time when Israel is fighting for its life after being invaded and then shelled from the north for a year doesn't make sense. I think that we really put our foot down in terms of how the Israelis executed their Operation Rafah. They did change how they were going to go about doing that. Frankly, Americans all told them it can't be done. It was done. There was a tremendous cost, and I am very sensitive to that. But I think the big lesson here is collectively, we can't allow adversaries to burrow themselves under populations, because this is the kind of carnage that follows if you want then to protect your citizens on the other side of the border. So at the end of the day, I think the U.S.-Israel relationship is quite strong. It should never come down to personalities. I give President Biden credit for saying, look, we're standing with the Israelis shoulder to shoulder in their fight for their security, and not saying yes to everything Netanyahu wants, and holding him accountable and not having meetings with him every other minute. That we have dysfunction within our political system. The Israelis have dysfunction within their political system, right? The defense minister was supposed to be here today, right, and he was told he's not flying because Netanyahu wanted to have that conversation first. I think it's important to remember the Israelis have never asked Americans to fight their wars. They're not about to start now. But as the White House spokesperson said yesterday, or maybe it was a State Department spokesperson, I forget, when asked, well, so you're pushing for a ceasefire in Lebanon right now, right? And he said, no, we're not. We want this to be done in such a way that civilians are protected as possible, but Hezbollah has to be knocked down to size. Like this threat has to be over. And there was an opportunity for months for Hezbollah to agree to a diplomatic initiative led by Amos Hochstein. And they said no, they said no, they said no. For months, not weeks, months, the Israelis said, look, if this works, great. But if it doesn't, we're going to have to push them back ourselves. And here we are. And what happens? Naim Qassem, the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah, who in his first public appearance after Nasrallah died was literally sweating profusely, in his second appearance basically says, yeah, we're happy to talk on a ceasefire now. We're going to delink ourselves from Hamas. That's not because they've had a change of heart. It's because they're having the stuffing kicked out of them. And the U.S. understands that Israel needs to finish that job. Now, we should be blunt with them about how they go about doing that. And we should also understand that the nature of war is that terrible things happen, and that it wasn't Israel that started or wanted this war.
I remember back when I was in Damascus in 2006, and I obviously followed the war closely. You could actually hear some of the Israeli military activity from Syria. We heard in Lebanon, but certainly the Israelis, did not. The Israeli military did not perform admirably, and I think they did learn a lot of lessons. But at the end of the day, at some point these things do end and diplomacy takes over. And I think it's going to be interesting when that happens. And, all the clamoring for a ceasefire kind of misses the point. That's not what the Israelis want. The Israelis want an implementation of the UN resolution 1701, or even, some more teeth in that. Yeah. So when we say
1559, 1560,
right. But when you say ceasefire, that doesn't mean anything. So, okay, great. Ceasefire then leads to immediate acceptance of UN resolution. So I'm with you on that. Before we go,
can I just jump in? I just want to say, so 1701 is great, and people point to 1701 all the time. 1701, by the way, is the UN Security Council resolution that came after the end of the 2006 war. Under 1701, Hezbollah was not supposed to be resupplied with rockets. Obviously, that didn't happen. Under 1701, Hezbollah is not supposed to deploy south of the Litani River. Clearly, that didn't happen. And so it's great to point to 1701 now, right? But 1701 wasn't and isn't worth the paper it's written on if it's not going to be enforced. And so the step moving forward is not just kind of soft diplomacy that flings this term out there, 1701. It has to be real diplomacy. Diplomacy itself is not soft unless you allow it to be. That says, we're going to implement 1701. And what are we going to do to enforce 1701? We're not just going to ask Hezbollah and Iran to please, if you don't mind, do the right thing and then find them not again. We've learned our lesson now, I hope. But there are structures for what, if and when there is a ceasefire, at some point, you're right, this is going to end, what that has to look like. And there's actual structure within UN Security Council resolutions for this.
Right. I agreed. And I'm not sure, certainly UNIFIL has not been an organization that has done a great job on this.
When you look at the infrastructure that Hezbollah has built throughout the South,
right,
right next to, underneath, all around Unifil.
Yeah.
For 18 years, they sat there and watched.
Yes.
And if they are honest when they say they didn't see, then they weren't even watching.
Let me switch to kind of what I think is an issue which is of huge importance, which does not get enough attention. That's the Iranian nuclear program. Yeah. Let's go even bigger in terms of U.S. policy on Iran. So, my sense is that we've never gotten this right in any administration. So we can kind of, seeing that there's going to be a change in administrations, but how do we get Iran policy right? I know the Atlantic Council just did a kind of a big project on this. But with that in mind, there's two issues. There's the Iran nuclear program and U.S. statements that they will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and also the notion of we've never held Iran accountable for the fact that we have Iranian operatives trying to kill former U.S. officials. That's to me an act of war, and that we've done nothing about it. And so I'll give you give me 5 minutes on what should U.S. Iran policy be, and I know this is probably a 3-hour conversation, but your views will be most welcome.
So look, obviously this is extremely complicated. Let's start with the lower hanging fruit and end with the nuclear program. Look, I did this big project mapping out Iran's external operations. You can find it at WashingtonInstitute.org. It's open access.
I would recommend people take a look at that. I certainly.
And so,
yep.
When I brief law enforcement and intelligence agencies about this, and they ask, "So what do we do?" I say, "Look, at the end of the day, the reason Iran does these things and continues to do these things without meaning to be too pithy is because they can, and because it's not that there hasn't been high enough cost. There's been no cost, right? So." Now we've had people arrested in this country for plots targeting current and former U.S. senior politicians. We've had someone who's still in Iran indicted for a plot to assassinate Ambassador Bolton, and a plot apparently also targeting Secretary Mike Pompeo. The head of MI5 gave a speech yesterday. They have thwarted 20 Iranian operations against Brits in the past few years. They are primarily now hiring proxies, not terrorist proxies, but criminal proxies. And we need to exact the cost. Now, one of the things we need to do is use our diplomatic tools. And that includes downgrading representation. I talk to Europeans about this all the time, but then we wouldn't have insight. I'm not asking you to shut down your embassy. I'm just asking you to lower the number of people or not to have an ambassador. Well, then they'll shut down our embassy. And my answer is, at the end of the day, I understand why you want to have an embassy in Iran. That I understand that. But the Iranians want your ambassador there. They want to have an embassy in your country. Like, they need that diplomatic touch point even more than you do. Don't allow yourself to be held over a barrel. We can't do anything to downgrade our diplomatic representation. We can't put in place visa bans for Iranians and their families who have done the worst of the worst. Most people don't know. You probably do have a pretty good sense of how many really, really, really bad actors in Iran have children who are studying at prestigious universities in the United States and Western Europe, whose wives are regularly going to shop in Paris or other places. There are a bunch of things that we can do to start exacting a cost short of military kinetic actions. But it can't only be law enforcement indictments, mostly of people who are not in custody, and Treasury and State Department designations, which have a place but can't be the sum total of our actions. I think that that's the case on the malign regional activity as well. The biggest thing we need to do going forward is leverage our intelligence capabilities. Based on that, leverage our military assets to do concrete things to make it much more difficult for Iran to rearm and refund its proxies. That is doable. It is hard. I understand. We want to pivot. I get it. But our adversaries get a vote, and they have voted with actions over the past year. And then finally, the nuclear program, which probably is going to come to a head very, very quickly, because the Iranian response to this back and forth with Israel, the Iranian response to the Israeli response that's likely coming, is probably not going to be another round of rockets. Maybe. But again, the Iranians' rocket capabilities have been shown to be not so impactful. They could have been very, very bad, but the Israelis and CENTCOM have better defensive capabilities. And again, the Iranians don't want this bleeding spilling into their borders. The most likely thing they do is to fast track their nuclear program, which they've already been doing over the past year. And that is going to lead us to the next crisis, because it has been the position of every U.S. administration since at least Clinton, that we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Does that mean we will not allow Iran to be a nuclear threshold state? Will we wait until they've actually weaponized something? There's all kinds of wiggle room here, and I'm not a politician. But at the end of the day, this is going to have to be dealt with, and it may be something that American politicians or some American politicians want to wiggle about. It's not something that any Israeli politicians or security personnel are going to want to wiggle about. So I think that is going to be the next big issue once we have and maybe not even once we have, as we are still coming out of the end of the October 7th attack and its aftermath, the Hamas rocket attacks since October 8th and their aftermath. And so we're in for a ride. This is the bumpy ride is not yet over.
I thought it was fascinating that in Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview, and I think this kind of shocked some of the U.S. national security establishment. She said, I think the question was, what's an adversary that worries her the most, and she said Iran.
Yeah.
And people, all the China hawks went crazy that it wasn't China, and then people who obviously worried about Russia, Ukraine, were upset about that. But I think, at least for me,
I read it. I heard it as in the moment. I heard it as it's not that China is not the pacing threat, and
right.
Those true. But in the moment, Iran is suddenly presenting a series of much more pressing threats than they had before. And you ask her what's keeping you up at night right now. Like, I understand her saying Iran, and I don't think she was saying it to the exclusion of China and Russia.
I mean, I thought it was great. As I've had friends who've been killed in Iraq because of Iran and proxies, as I've based on my career, and of course, 44 now it's 46 Americans who died on October 7th, or due to October 7th, and with Iran as a nuclear threshold state. I mean, I'm glad she's thinking of this, and so I didn't think that was something that we should actually be concerned about, in particular because there are always questions on, okay, what is her Middle East policy going to be? So if she's worried about Iran, she's talking about Iranians having a lot of blood on their hands, or the Iranian government. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's speaking truth to power, and it's not to the exclusion of the other threats. Exactly. Matt, that's unfortunately all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for joining us, and hope you'll consider so again soon. Anytime you wear the Red Sox shirt, I'll show up. But really incredible days, and I think this podcast will come out either tonight or tomorrow. I'm just going to move my camera so you can see my pennant. So But who knows what's going to happen over the next couple of days. I want to thank everyone out there for listening. DSR will be back later this week with more of our regularly scheduled podcasts, and we hope you'll join us for all of them, and then join me once again for the DSR's Above Average Intelligence Show. Matt, this was a delight to have you on. You are a true expert on Hizballah. Again, I keep this book right next to me. I don't take it in the studio to MSNBC. That'd be a little weird. But I certainly have it as reference guide. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the great work, and really appreciate you all that you're doing in helping U.S. national security for sure. Right back at you, Marc. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate you and the pod. Appreciate the service you've put in over many years and the important work you're doing now. Thanks for having me on the pod. All right, don't get off yet.